To dissect Europe's state of affairs, one may objectively label the continent's future as bleak. Embroiled in war on its eastern flank, records high inflation, disruptions to freedom of navigation, investigations into widespread corruption, and a flood of illegal migration, all of which directly threaten European nations and therefore must urgently be addressed. Nevertheless, with hope, faith, and a proven historic track record, I'm confident that Europe will yet stand in the face of adversity. Good evening, I'm Jonathan Hessen, and this is the 21st edition of TV7 Europa Stands. Joining me to deliberate the latest of Europe's most pressing challenges and opportunities are General Klaus Naumann, formerly the Chief of Defense of the Bundeswehr and Chairman of NATO's Military Committee. It's good to see you, General. Dr. Rafael Bardaji, formerly the National Security Advisor of Spain and currently the CEO of Worldwide Strategy, and Mr. Timo Soini, the former Foreign Minister of our host country here, Finland, as well as the Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you.
It's good to see you all, and I'd like to immediately start with you, General. When we're looking at the various European challenges at hand, one thing that comes to mind is the choice of the people. Many elections are lined up for the near future. We just had a couple of elections already behind us. What will Europeans expect from Europe's next leadership? And is there a shift taking hold?
Well, I'm not entirely sure what the outcome of these elections in Europe will be. The election which affects all of us is the election to the European Parliament. And there I expect change in the composition of the Parliament. I do not know in which direction it will go. I expect that the, if I may say so, the conservative element of the European Parliament will possibly remain the strongest, and that means that everything goes well, that the European Commission, at least the leadership, will remain more or less the same as it is. Whether this is good for Europe or not, I leave to the spectators. But not all is bleak in Europe, and I would like to mention at least one fact, and that is the most successful alliance of world's history. NATO got 75 years old in April, and that is a remarkable success. It became a guarantor of security, stability, and democracy, and I hope that it will continue to do so. And I may add, due to Putin's mistake of an unprovoked and illegal aggression in Ukraine, NATO got stronger than ever before, since now we have Finland and Sweden as members, and that is a geostrategic advantage which goes beyond Moscow's expectations.
Absolutely, stronger together. Dr. Bardaji, with that being said, we do hear from various chiefs of intelligence, the latest being in Belgium, as well as top parliamentarians, including the Speaker of the European Parliament, coming out and highlighting what has been already known for quite some time, that China, Russia, and the Islamic Republic of Iran in particular are engaged in a campaign of disinformation, trying to tilt the various elections taking place throughout Europe in their advantage, obviously. What can be done to contend with those challenges? And are there individuals reinforcing this also from within?
Of course, I think they are. No? But let me be a little bit of a cheap philosopher for a second. I think Europe, after the Second World War, basically defined herself as a market. Liberal forces, conservative liberal in European terms, so the individuals are basically consumers. Progress was defined as the ability to spend money, you know, and mass consumerism. And in that road, we left aside identity, the nation souls, the borders, and also our ability to understand others that think with a different logic. And that's what I think is happening now. General Naumann mentioned Putin. I think we are still, after 2 years after the invasion of Ukraine. We still don't understand the reason why Putin did that, and without understanding that, it's going to be very difficult to solve the situation. And it's happening as well with all other elements that you put on the table. No? I think we are making ourselves alive more difficult because we don't pay attention to the other's logic. China, Russia, or Iran lately, they have a different, not a different agenda usually is defined, it's a different strategic culture. And without understanding that, I think we are unsuitable to progress in finding the right solutions in our own interest.
Very interesting indeed, Mr. Soini.
I think that the coming elections are many holds that there are, of course, European issues, which is market issues and employment and inflation and something which is connected to euro currency and that kind of stuff. But as well as what Rafael just said, there are so-called new agenda items on the table, especially borders. We think that Europe is borderless, that you can come and go, a capital can go, human beings, services and everything else. Borders are back. And that is also what national identity is back. And even if this woke is very bizarre and ridiculous, it shows also that everything cannot be pushed through. There will be a conservative value backlash in some sense. And then, of course, like Klaus said, there will be a fight of hegemonia. And the big issue is, it's very likely that conservative and socialists are the two bigots, but so-called extreme right, which is not very extreme, at least not all the parties, it's very likely that they are going to have huge gains. And I just take one example is Italy. I think the Italian Brothers, which is the party of Giorgia Meloni, has now 5 or 6 seats or something like that currently. They will get 30, which is 2 times what all of Finland will have in the European Parliament. We will see this kind and witness this kind of phenomena as well.
I think, if I may comment, the far right you refer to, it is a matter of where you're sitting.
Of course,
because ultimately the so-called left, which in the past used to be regarded as regular left or radical left, has been brought into the center and more legalized and normalized, and therefore there was somewhat of a clash within that definition of what each camp is.
And as like you said, it's also a political label to your forehead, to be labeled extreme.
But nonetheless, there are people on both fringes and both extremes, and we need to be very considerate of each one, what every word uttered of every mouth actually means and what it brings into the table in order to challenge it accordingly. But General Naumann, I'd like to touch on the philosophical touch that Dr. Bardaji added to the table, and that is Europe needs a soul. That was the first edition that we brought here in Europa Stands, the necessity to re-engage with the European nation states from a perspective that Western civilization is still a legitimate framework for all nations in this continent to operate and to define norms and values and to bring forward a reality where not every person is just a number or a commodity, but rather that leaders will once again reintroduce the family as the forefront of Western civilization in bringing about faith and understanding of the core principles that have provided such a rich history to the continent at large.
Well, I believe Rafael is absolutely correct. The identity of every European rests with his nation, and you cannot eliminate the nation state. Perhaps I'm looking at this question from the perspective of a former soldier. I think I would never have been able to tell the soldiers which I had under my command you have to fight for Europe. I was able to tell them, you have to fight for your country, you have to be prepared to die for the protection of your family, and that is the core of the issue. But Europe is too far away. And for that reason, I think the good old General de Gaulle was not so absolutely off the mark when he spoke of the Europe of the fatherlands. And I think that is something we should keep in mind. It will be the summary of fatherlands with all their strengths, with all their weaknesses, with their peculiarities, which can be brought together. And then we can talk about that diversity may be a strength, but we have to protect the diversity.
Indeed. Well, of course, every nation under God, when we're looking particularly from a holistic perspective, why is this historic truth being challenged to such a degree? And is foreign efforts to somehow divide and conquer, so to speak, a actual reality that governments in the West are failing to recognize?
Well, I think being a little bit superficial, let me say, during centuries, European culture was defined by a holy trinity: God, fatherland or motherland, and family. Those three institutions has been challenged for the last century, from the Enlightenment to the psychoanalysis. So we don't have anymore the border defining the land. God was killed, and the family has been dissolved into something else. No? So we are losing our historical references. But since the market emerged as the new God, many forces, including conservative in the center, took the market as the defining institution. But this is not anymore the case. I think, as Klaus and Timo said, the soul of and the heart of the people are still with the nations, and that is resurfacing. Do we have the time to reconquer the identities? I'm not sure. We have the illegal immigration, which is flooding many European capitals and countries, dissolving even more the societies where we lived. But that's the challenge.
Yeah, and what is the factors which unite us? That is very, very important. Is economy enough? It's necessity, but not enough. So what could be enough? Some kind of virtues, some kind of cooperation, some kind of norms, and so-called country should be guided by law, and that kind, and we should be equal before the law and everything else. But I think this also says, and when we look at the European institutions, European Parliament, it's like a minestrone soup. It has everything from everywhere. And then Commission is a bunch of bureaucrats who nobody has elected or voted for. And then there are national governments which are representing the countries and their citizens. And maybe that Council of Ministers is a most democratic organ in there. But these two other organs, Parliament and Commission, are federal structures, and Council of Ministers is a national structure. And I think there is a kind of a tug of war between this.
But let me ask, actually, because democracy works to the extent so long as the people living within it actually want it to function.
Yeah, but I think democracy has been basically going down to elections, and I think that's not enough. When you talk in the introduction about widespread corruption, the problem is democracy without accountability is not democracy.
Right. We're talking now about, for instance, I'll take Qatargate as an example.
Yeah. Or Morocco Gate.
Whatever gates, but there are a number of investigations ongoing. The three police investigators have been already the target of assassination attempts by foreign actors. The lead prosecutor or the lead investigator was poisoned in an attempted assassination. 167 individuals have been under investigation for corruption of receiving fiscal benefits from foreign entities for the purpose of diverting European attention. How can European nations, the people within those nations, actually trust the governments that they will treat their interests in the care that it's supposed to be? General?
Well, if the case is so as you portrayed it, then the people will not trust the government. And that's a phenomenon which we see in the one or the other country. Particularly if you have coalition governments, which are by definition weak anyway, and which have quite often the tendency that it is the tail which wags the dog and not the other way around. I think the only way to cope with it is absolute and full transparency and strict action against the perpetrators. If they are not punished, regardless where they are, then people will lose confidence and will no longer trust. And then at the end of the day, the victim is democracy. And for that reason, I think we have to do what we can to make sure that everyone who acts illegally will be brought to justice.
Dr. Bardaji, can you provide us with a little bit of optimism? I don't want to wait to the end of the program for that.
I think, following Klaus' words, I think we are living in an era of mistrust. Nobody trusts anymore the institution as they had the benefit in the last decades. Not even football teams anymore. No, they are corrupted and everything. At the same time, the benefit for the governments and the institution is that we live also in an age of distraction. So every scandal is succeeded in the next day from a new event, a new scandal, and we tend to forget. I'll give you an example. October the 7th attack against the Israeli citizens. It's almost forgotten now, 6 months later. No? Things are in a continuous change, and people are unable to focus on anything in particular. So that's the benefit for the government, even if they don't have the trust of the people as they used to be. You know? The good and positive thing is that things are moving. For the first time, parties which are civilizational, identity-oriented, on the rise in Europe. There is a reaction to the woke mentality, but it's a long-term fight. No, nothing is going to be changed in the next couple of months or couple of years. It has to be consistent and apply a lot of energy to redress the situation.
Mr. Soini, when I look here at Finland, obviously the situation is a lot better than the rest of Europe when we're talking about all the multiple facets. Nonetheless, looking westward, you see Sweden, you see what's happening in Malmö, for instance, where police is scared to enter. And just last Ramadan with Eid al-Fitr and the other events taking place in Sweden, you saw droves, thousands upon thousands of Muslims together taking over entire squares in order to practice their religion, but at the same time infringing upon the local communities which are no longer safe in their own country. I think it was reported a couple of months ago that Sweden is the most bombed country in peacetime around the world today, which is, I couldn't fathom something like this a decade or 2 decades ago.
I think that Rafael got a point that in some of the so-called Nordic welfare states, maybe except Finland, God has been killed. If you, for example, look Sweden, it's hardly non-existing. It was a kind of the pillow of social democracy that everybody should have a warm drink and a nice little hat, and everybody is discussing with each other. And then if somebody comes in, we were thinking that we had such a good welfare state system, everybody is getting schooling, and you adopt our way of life. But it doesn't happen. It didn't happen. People are coming and they adopt their own life. And in due course of time, when amounts of people are growing, it will be a hit. And that is what has happened. And I'm afraid also that in due course of time, if immigration is not, in proportion, this could happen. Everybody knows that if somebody comes from the Philippines to look after the elderly, it's not a problem. But if young males are fleeing their own country, what they are supposed to defend, they are coming here, not for work or just for other reasons. It's not healthy. And for example, now from Ukraine, where the refugee comes, it's mainly women and children. When you come from the Middle East, it's mainly young males. No children, no women.
Military age.
Yeah.
Military age, indeed. General Naumann, obviously Germany has plenty of millions, but it's still not too late, as opposed to the UK or France, where you see that those countries are pretty much packed in a sense where I don't recognize certain neighborhoods of Paris anymore, which today are not French. Is that the future of Europe?
Well, I simply do not know. I know that we have a problem with what we call integration of immigrants. We did not succeed too well. We lived for many, many years with the illusion that if we simply let everyone do what he wants to do without too much limitations, cherishing individual freedom as the ultimate value, that then everything would be in order. We learned that this is not true and that this was a mistake. And now we have to find a way how to do it better. We are in this process. We do not know yet the proper solution. But we know that there are some basic values which we hopefully will not give up. And that the one value which I believe is at the center of everything is that the right of every individual to pursue its way to happiness should be protected by the power of the laws. That is the core of our democratic life.
With that being said, and I'd like to touch on this, something that we had a conversation earlier this week or last week when Rishi Sunak announced that boats will be blocked and sending those illegal immigrants to Africa will no longer be a hurdle. It seems like for too long the same laws that were inserted in order to protect civilians and citizens in particular have been turned against the citizens in order to protect illegal conduct that has threatened those countries themselves.
Yes, indeed. The problem is that I don't like to quote Lenin often, but let me do that one time. Lenin said once that at a certain point quantity becomes quality. And I think we have reached that point with the Muslim population in European countries. No? With social evidence, when you have more than 12% of Muslim population in your country, they become a real problem. So yes, all Prime Minister can say we are going to deport the criminals, we should be deported, but how many are we talking about? Do you have the means, legal means, financial means to send them back to where? If they just destroy their passport, you don't know where they are coming. Do you have a legal agreement with the recipient and host countries back in Africa or wherever they are? Well, it's not as easy as is usually promised, but it has to be done. We know for sure that Morocco is emptying their prisons and send the criminals in a kind of non-declared amnesty to Europe. So what we are having is not the best of the workforce to save our pensions. On the contrary. So I think we need to understand who's coming, because when you open the doors of your home, you don't want to invite someone who is going to rape your daughters, or is going to kill your wife, or is going to beat yourself. You need to understand who is coming into your country. And that has not been done, and has to be done essentially fast, because if not, we are doomed.
Everyone has a responsibility to protect their country and their family, as General Naumann noted. Yeah. That is something that everybody should be willing to fight for. But let's talk also about hybrid migration.
Yeah.
The border between Russia and Finland remains shut to date. Can you give us a little bit of insight?
It's now have been shut for months, and it's a long border, 1,340 kilometers. Finnish border to Russia, what used to be a Soviet Union, is 1.5 times bigger than all joint NATO countries together. So it's huge. And there are half a dozen crossing points. And now they are sealed, but it has been winter, it has been cold, it has been a lot of snow. But that kind of a hybrid operation is that Russia is giving a free ride to those people to our borders. When we have a normal system, there is a buffer zone on both sides of the border, and they don't let them go to the buffer zone, so there is no problem. But when you let them go and you come here and you set asylum, because of the international laws, you should take the papers and the guy in order to investigate his or her case individually. And there is also an industry of Amnesty International, all kind of international organization, who said, even the churches and everything else, you should do this. And what is also hybrid, because in the seconds, the message go via internet and via phones that on what's checking point, so-called the queue is shortening. And that can be happening in very quick way, and there are organized smugglers and on the other side. And this is what has happened, and that is why the border is now closed. But I don't even dare to think what would happen if they would organize people to go beside, or if there is a checking point and here is another, and in the between is few hundred kilometers, you go through the woods. Where can we find those forces to run everybody?
Well, I hope we have technology to do that.
Yeah,
these
hopefully.
days. But General Naumann, hybrid migration has been utilized as a weapon in recent years. Well, not only in recent years, many years, but now particularly we see it also utilized against Poland initially, and then we see it now against Finland and other countries as well. How can NATO, as an alliance, work in order to protect its allies from this type of danger at a time when the main adversary, namely Russia in this case, is utilizing this time and again?
Well, the help begins with understanding that hybrid migration is an instrument of hybrid warfare. Mm-hmm. That is not the, I should say, not yet consensus in NATO, as far as I can see it from the outside. We need to understand this. We need to understand that hybrid migration can also be used to bring in destabilizing elements in a country which may then, at the end of the day, at a given signal, threaten national security. And we have to identify ways and means how we can cope with it. It's a new dimension, and we see right now with the, if I may mention this example, which has nothing to do with migration, if we may take the example of the Houthi actions in the Red Sea, which is undoubtedly a local action, but which has global dimension in threatening our economies and our welfare. So we have to think through all these elements of hybrid warfare, including the role of social media and of the media, which also help to destabilize our countries by portraying the suffering of these poor migrants in a way which has not much to do with balanced reporting. So we have to think through this entire dimension And that is something where we are at the beginning and which has so many ramifications and opening doors that it will take us some time to come to common conclusions to be accepted by 32 free nations.
Well, the billions upon billions of euros that are being poured into Europe, the billions upon billions into the United States, Canada, by totalitarian regimes to disinform the public, to disinform the lawmakers in order to improve their own positions is abysmal and should be corrected. And I hope that leaders watching right now should take this into account. But Dr. Bardaji, I'd like to expand also on the Iranian connection into this story. The Russians are pushing right now into Ukraine. They're making certain gains. Hopefully the supplement now of the foreign aid package that was approved by Congress and the Senate will ultimately bring about the necessary shift. Nonetheless, this is not only a Russian-Ukrainian battle, but rather an axis of Russia, China, the Islamic Republic of Iran, North Korea, and others operating in concert against the West, including Europe, including the United States, including Israel for that matter. And we're seeing this expanded and becoming more and more dire as time progresses, with the Red Sea, of course, having severe implications also for European trade, which is heavily reliant on seaborne commodities. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I think there is a clear axis between Moscow, Damascus, Iran, and Yemen, and on the Far East, and Beijing as well. No? But in NATO, we failed miserably to connect the dots. Only our enemies are connecting the right dots against us. No? So we are still treating the world as a many theaters in a different ways. No? We have the Ukraine and in Central Europe, we have the Middle East, and we have the Far East, with total disconnection in a strategy approach. No? We are dealing with every one theater in a separate way, and that's a mistake in my own view. No? I think they are really linked together in order to destabilize our liberal order, and in order to advance their agenda together. And we are not, simply. We are divided. We don't see the same world together anymore. No? But having said that, I think we are our worst enemies. No? Talking about a little bit back on immigration, it wasn't Putin who started the hybrid warfare using the people. It was Angela Merkel who opened not only Germany's border, but the whole European Union borders. No? I remember that it's also the media you mentioned, the woke mentality. I remember in 2015 a picture in one of the major newspapers in Spain, totally woke, with columns of black people and say, refugees from Syria. And I say, oh my God, I didn't know there were so many black people in Syria. No? They don't care. It's just as far as you are opening your arms to anyone, it's fine. No? And third, as Timo said, there is a big industry of NGOs getting money to move the people around. And it happens also with the lobbies from countries like Qatar, Morocco, Algeria, and others in the European institutions. So I think we have to be much more careful on the way we receive money into our institutions, in the accountability of the people, because if not, all this will under the table and nothing will change.
Yeah, I think Rafael has a point in that sense that we have been unable to have the dots on the same line, so to say. But American Congress and House got it finally right. And I don't think it's by accident that they went through in very short term of time Ukraine, Israel's and Taiwan's packages, because that was a clear alarming bell.
But why doesn't Europe join the United States?
That is of course,
and make the same supplement, the same amount for each one of those allies.
We should, and that is our weakness. European institutions have done some job, but individual countries, and if we look, for example, Viktor Orban and Fico, they say that we don't have to support Ukraine at all. But if we really look and understand strategic ways, all these crises are connected, and it was finally went through because somebody got early kickoff in America's houses that what changed the tune, because they understood China is in the back, and they knew that if by intelligent information and that if this is going to collapse, it's not only Ukraine. The first would be Ukraine, but the shock wave will be also in the Middle East and in Taiwan. That's what I think.
Absolutely. And more than that, I think that something that people don't realize about those supplements that the United States passed and President Biden signed into law, the majority of those are actually to replenish America's stocks of weaponry, to strengthen American presence in certain regions where it has been depleted because it rediverted the attention otherwhere. So there's a lot of that taking place. But General?
Yeah. Well, I think we are now approaching an area which needs urgently to be addressed. We need to understand what modern strategy means. It is no longer to look at local events or regional events. Most regional events have global dimensions in our interconnected world. It's not widely understood. Secondly, I dare to say that we may be in a global conflict since years and have noticed at all that we are in this conflict since years.
World War III is upon us.
Third point, we are used to act reactively. Whether this is still good enough in a time of hybrid operations is very questionable. We may be forced to use preventively, and using in preventive mode also military instruments. So the old saying, the military is the ultima ratio, which was always translated in the wrong way, since ultima in Latin means the utmost, not the last. We need to understand this. Next point is our governments, excepted the United States of America, are used to handle one crisis at a time. Today, we will see a couple of crises simultaneously popping up here, there, and there, but they may be interconnected. They may follow a master plan which we do not know, which we have to understand. And this complexity of modern crisis management and modern international security policy will make thinkers through a lot of things, including, if I may touch on the sacred cow, including the holy principle of NATO to act unanimously. Whether you can act in crisis by seeking unanimous decision of 32, also
which is not required according to the NATO Charter.
It is not required by the treaty. The only thing which is required by the treaty is unanimous vote on membership.
Right.
Mm-hmm. But anything else is open. We have to think all these issues through, and each of these issues which I mentioned is definitely called by politicians like Timo a sacred cow, but we have to slaughter some of them.
Yeah.
Dr. Bardaji.
I think Klaus has a very good point, but let me rephrase in a different way. Since the famous Francis Fukuyama article, The End of History, we thought that we were free of everything, the use of force, we were converting our military bases into golf camps and everything. Then we got the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, and people say, we are after the end of history. They are still in the prehistory. But what we had learned in the last years is that actually we are caught in history, and the people like Putin and Xi and others are in the post-history era. So they are much more advanced than us, and they understand much better the realities and how to manipulate events in their interest that we still think we are angels in a kind of paradise on earth, but we are not. And the question that was put forward by Klaus, I think is very interesting, has been discussed in Israel lately. Do we have to rely in our passive defense forever, or we need to anticipate events, recapturing the concept of preventive warfare or attacks or whatever? Well, I think we need to put everything on the table and be free to discuss everything, because if not, we will be stuck in a wrong strategy and in the wrong approach to the events that are emerging now in a different world. No?
Mr. Soini, are we free to discuss all those matters?
I'm afraid not, but we are approaching the limit in that sense that the problems are so huge and so interconnected that we must take the curtain down in a way. And because it's very hard in the societies who have been emerging and prosper to understand that their boys could be killed in the war. And there is also a big differences between the countries' ability and also the how would I say, the will to defend them on military way. And I'm very, very worried about this, that if really somebody hit us, would we be able to fight back? Israel is an exception. There has been always a perception that there is a conscription for males and females, and even though it has been attacked, even though they have been prepared. But what would have happened if there would have been only the we are the children, we are the world, we are kumbaya, they would be destroyed. And I think that we have at least to think and put that kind of items to the table, that can this be happening in Europe? A long time we think it cannot, but now what is happening in Ukraine, it's easy for Europeans to say that we will fight to the last Ukrainian. But what would happen after that? We should be honest.
The Chief of Defense of both the United Kingdom as well as the Chief of Defense of Australia came out and said the sacrifice of Ukrainians buys the West time. Are we using this time prudently?
I think he's right. Ukraine is fighting for the freedom of Europe, from my perspective. And we should, for that reason, we should do all we can to help them and to support them. This is not the case in all European countries. We could do much, much more. And I hope that we will understand. And the other lesson we should learn from the brave and courageous action of the Ukrainians is that we can cope with a challenge such as Russia plus China plus Iran if we remember what was said by President Truman at the founding ceremony of NATO in 1949. Translated in a very simple way. If we all stand together, if we understand that an attack on one of us is an attack on all of us, if we understand that this principle has saved us peace, freedom, and prosperity for 75 years, and that we draw the conclusion from that we have to continue, and should there anyone ever dare to enter our territories, he should know that the answer will be a collective one by all of us. And I cannot see anyone who could dare to challenge the united Western world.
Dr. Bardaji?
Well, I have to say that despite all the effort that the Americans and the European allies have done in favor of supporting the Ukrainian regime, I would like to remind the initial reaction, no? When Putin launched in February 2002 the first wave of invasion pointed to Kiev, the Americans sent a plane to take Zelensky and his family out. And Zelensky famously said, I don't need a taxi, I need anti-tank weapons. No? Thank God we reverted the trend, but the instinct was, okay, this is finished, say whatever we can and run away, no? Take the money and run, basically. That's a mentality. That mentality is what has to be challenged, because if not, it's not the only division among European allies, it's also a division among political elites. The Republicans and Americans are not the same like the center Democrats or the left Democrats. President Trump, if he comes elected again, will be a different policy towards Ukraine than Biden administration. So I think there are many divisions still that could put at risk what we have achieved helping Ukraine. But I'm absolutely convinced that at this stage, we have to fight even more aggressively against the Putin Union, which is what succeeded the Soviet Union, not Russia.
Yeah.
I think that the decline of Christianity in Europe has brought about the decline of understanding the essence of Christianity, and that is Jesus Christ as the sacrifice. And that's why when you don't understand the sacrifice, the necessity to sacrifice for your liberty, for your freedom, for your family, then you lose sight of the most important ingredient that ultimately has been forgotten in many Western capitals, amongst them many leaders who control and direct the world, and therefore they could not fathom that Ukraine was willing to sacrifice for its future. And the future, as a consequence, also for Europe, and something that is also a derivative thereof, the sacrifice that Israel is making also for the West, and for itself, but also for the West. And people need to understand that. But Mr.
I think you have a point, because what happened in Ukraine also in religious way, when Russia attacked the Ukrainian church, said that we are not going to be a part of Moscow church. We will be fighting. We will be independent. We will be Christ-leaning community here in Ukraine. We are not a church of invaders and so forth. And I think this has been ongoing in European countries for a long time. There was a saying that politics shouldn't enter the church, but church has entered to politics.
But what needs to be done for...
I think the church leaders and priests and bishops, they should be bishops and priests with proclaiming the gospel and not adopting the way of politicians. And that is what has happened throughout the globe, throughout the Western world. Have you heard established bishop to mention a word sin once in their lifetime? What is sin? Sin is an act against God's will. They don't talk about this. They are talking about the climate change and be nice to your neighbor and take somebody to your ferry and everything else.
But you have a little problem if the head of the Russian Orthodox Church is issuing a paper in which he says a sin is to resist against the will of the Russian people to expand and to widen the Russian nation to 600 million, which is an ambitious goal. If you look at the 144 million, of which 51% are Muslim. But anyway...
but Kirill is...
You touch at one of the issues which are really at the core of our deliberations.
Is he a head of church, though, or is he a head of an intelligence agency?
He was an intelligence officer, and now he's head of a church that, well, I don't know whether this is okay.
But one thing, what I think is a core issue in Ukraine's success is that church is fighting side by side with people in Ukraine.
But I think we touch here on one issue which is very important, and that is what you mentioned, Jonathan, was that the Middle East situation is touching at our security as well. And I think there is some truth in that. If we look back, the State of Israel was created after the utmost crime against humanity which had happened. And the idea was to give to all people of Jewish belief an area where they could feel safe. That was the identity of Israel. And under this identity and developed a democracy, the only one in this part of the world. If we permit that this democracy will be endangered or will be destroyed, then we start to destroy ourselves. And for that reason, it is connected to European security. And we need to understand this as part of the global conflict in which we are, of which Ukraine is one element, the Middle East is another one, and Iran is also part of it.
And I think even Taiwan and the Pacific
I think we have seen something imaginable in the last days. Iran attacking directly Israel, Israel counter-attacking directly Iran, and World War III didn't break out. I think the West has to be conscious that we have been waging warfare by proxies, something that we criticize of others. We have been Taiwan against China, Israel against Iran, and Ukraine against Russia. It is the time to come to terms with the reality and say, okay, those are fighting our war. How can we help, or how can we engage even more directly? Because World War III is a concept just to instill fear. We can prevent World War III perfectly well if we are strong enough, no? and prevail.
World War III is not inevitable, I believe. We still have plenty of time to do plenty of measures in order to bring about a reality that will alter the equation in the favor of free societies and the West at large. But we're drawing near to the end of the program. I'd like to give each and every one of you the opportunity to give a little bit of insight where things are heading. Of course, ahead of our next production next month. General Naumann, we'll start with you. What should we focus on, and what are the key challenges still that we have not yet touched on during today's discussion?
Well, I think we should express our expectation that the forthcoming NATO summit should address global security. That means we can only keep the United States engaged in Europe if we are prepared to be on their side as well if there are challenges for the United States, such as China.
And what message can we expect from the upcoming NATO summit in Washington?
I hope that we will get the message that the success recipe of NATO is as valid as it was in 1949. If we stand together, all for one and one for all, then we can cope with all challenges and can secure prosperity, security, and well-being.
Dr. Bardaji?
Well, I think we have to overcome our fears and abandon completely this old mentality that better dead than fighters, no? And we need to understand warfare as it is today. It's not a war game. It's not a roller coaster. We need to have a strategic depth and give time to military personnel to achieve their goals. No? It's happening in Ukraine. It's happening in Israel as well. No? And we need to understand these dynamics. We have an elite, a political elite that has not known warfare in personal terms, thank God, but that doesn't mean that they understand anything what's happening. On the contrary, I think we need to put a much more focus on violent events because they are emerging in the world. And that brings me to Iran, attacked Israel a few days ago, and now probably rushing into a nuclear proliferation and military program. And we will need to face that challenge in every terms that we can. No?
IAEA Director Rafael Grossi just earlier last week came out and said that Iran is not several months away from a nuclear weapon, but rather several weeks away. What are we to expect from that? Is there a certain comprehension starting to emerge in the West about the threat emanating from the Islamic Republic of Iran, and not only by the fact that a crazy totalitarian regime will hold weapons of mass destruction to that scale, but rather what type of impact will it cause other nations? Germany, South Korea, Japan, will all those nations now also turn nuclear?
Well, I think we saw Iran in his best when launching 300 missiles against Israel a couple of weeks ago, and we can expect the same behavior in the future. If they were protected by a nuclear umbrella, it will be much more difficult to react. If they were launching a nuclear weapon, it will be the end of the history as we know it. So I think now is the time to realize that we can put economic pressure, much more clever sanctions, and military pressure on the table to prevent Iran from moving into a nuclear state. And all the options should be on the table. And the Ayatollahs must understand that if they continue searching for a nuclear weapon, it will be severely punished until they change their mind.
Mr. Soini?
I think that we must understand in the West that weakness is not a valid currency. And that is something which can be very painful for us because we have been encouraging the negotiation programs and all kind of multinational rule-based world and everything else, which is like a mantra. It's very clever mantra, but if others are not playing the rules, the only way to get respect is have strength. And I think it's also like Klaus said, the NATO meeting is very important. Now when Finland and Sweden are also part of the NATO, we are now facing the so-called military technical consequences of NATO because Russia has put Iskander missiles just beside our border. We shouldn't be alarmed on this. The false reaction would be to stay back. Now we must stay firm. They are there, but we will have a strength. We have a unified West everywhere on large scale, and that should be our strategy. It goes to Israel, it goes to Ukraine, it goes to Taiwan, northern parts of NATO, everything. And we must be politically brave enough to say this aloud. I think people of the West nations would understand if we put it plainly and honestly to their plate.
If I may also add to this discussion, I think one of the most important things to realize, or at least understand from history, is that empires implode from within. And today, the United States, of course, is defined as the Rome of the 21st century, but I'm not sure which one, the United States or Europe, is Byzantium in this context. And therefore, one thing that leaders must do is listen to the people, and a true revival is necessary to reignite the comprehension of what sacrifice is all about in Europe. And for that, much needs still to be done, and there is still much work in the field to bring forth the different challenges, to contend with them and to face them. But for that, we've run out of time. I'd like to thank General Naumann, Dr. Bardaji, and Mr. Soini as well, and I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition of TV7 Europa Stand from here in Helsinki, good evening.